Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 1st of December 2023, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now looking at the table of contents, we find the very first article is about defense deals, because right now the Defense Acquisition Council of India, they signed off huge amount of defense agreements with local manufacturing companies. Next, we'll be looking at the emerging global order in regards to an interview which was published in the Hindu. In the next one, we will be looking at the Loss and Damages Fund and the related concepts, because at COP28 this was finally officially announced. In the next article, we'll be looking at two economic indicators and the estimates of it. First, we'll be looking at GDP. Second, we will be looking at fiscal deficits which have been reported right now. In the last article, we'll be looking at what is an XPoSat, the X-ray observatory satellite which will be launched by the ISRO in the coming months. Now before starting, I want to state that the handout for this discussion is available in description below, so do definitely check it out for your better revision purposes. The very first article is regarding the defense deals which were signed off in India. And here the Defense Acquisition Council approved a massive defense deal that is spanning around 97 Tejas aircrafts and 156 Prachand helicopters. And this deal will be boosting the armed forces in India. This is very important for mains and also for prelims for the various aspects of it. In GS3, we have various security forces and agencies and their mandate. So we need to discuss this particularly in focus with the Defense Acquisition Council. This is the highest decision-making body when it relates to the procurement of, say, spacecrafts, helicopters, which are strategically important for the armed forces in India. So this is actually situated under the Ministry of Defense, and this will be taking the highest amount of decisions that is required for the procurement for the armed forces. And here the objective is the procurement requirement of the armed forces wherever it is related to, say, submarines, aircrafts that will be needed for Army, Air Force and Navy, and also the coastal guards. So this will be looking at these requirements. The formation of Defense Acquisition Council can be traced back to the Kargil War, where after the post-Kargil War analysis, the government of the day and also the various defense experts, they thought that India can do better with a Defense Acquisition Council which will be looking at whether the technological requirements of the modern day armed forces are up to date in India or not, and how the different amounts of, say, aircrafts, ships, naval fleet, can they be manufactured domestically, or should they be imported from the other nations, or say there can be even, say, joint ventures in some cases. So there must be a body for that. And also after the Kargil War, India found many lapses in its security apparatus, and that is why, following a group of ministers' recommendations on reforming the national security system in 2001, the Defense Acquisition Council was conceptualized. The composition of it is very easy to understand. The chairman or the chairperson is a defense minister. The members is consisting of the chief of defense staff and also all the air force, armed force, then there will be naval forces, chiefs. So all the chiefs are also present, as we can also see from the picture here. So this is a meeting of the DAC which is taking place, and everyone is sitting together. They are deliberating on the various needs of the day with reference to defense procurement. The functions we have to understand. It is very easy to understand too that they will be forming a 15-year term integrated perspective plan that will be looking into the requirements of various aircrafts, of various security apparatus, artillery requirements, ammunition requirements for all the defense forces, and they have to prepare this 15-year plan. Then a very, very important accord of acceptance of necessity needs to be signed or, say, announced before a particular procurement can go on. This acceptance of necessity, it means that there is a necessity of say Tejas aircraft in India, and that is why the DS is sitting together and they have officially announced one acceptance of necessity in this case. This means that all the members and the majority of the meeting minutes of the meeting here, they have agreed upon the procurement and they have now announced the plans to manufacture the aircrafts related to Tejas and helicopters. Also, they will be categorizing the various projects or say defense projects in India. The very first is buy. These buy projects mean that we will be buying from foreign nations. For example, say we have procured aircrafts from Dassault, that is the Rafale aircrafts. We also engage in deal with Lockheed Martins. So these are the foreign contractors from where we buy the aircrafts. Then also we have another kind of category known as buy and make. For example, say if India engages with a foreign contractor, say Dassault. Now Dassault will be say selling Rafale to India, right? And also Indian government can say that maybe out of the 15 Rafales that India will be buying, let you make one Rafale in India, so that the Indian local manufacturing defense companies, they can learn from the technologies of Dassault and they can also learn to manufacture domestic aircrafts in this manner. So there are these categories also, where in various defense deals there are some offset clauses. Right now in India we have an offset clause of rupees 300 crore plus. That means if a foreign contractor is supplying aircrafts or any kind of defense procurement to India, and if that project cost is more than 300 crore plus, they have to do some offset. They have to make some of the aircrafts, make some of the ammunition, or say transfer some of the technologies to India. That is to benefit India over the long term. So that is the category of buy and make. Then there is this category which is to make. Make means it is indigenously produced. That means it is kind of make in India. So the total aircraft, for example the Tejas, which will be say manufactured by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, which is a CPSE in India, or say Central Public Sector Enterprise. So this Tejas will be totally manufactured from beginning to end in India itself. So these are the three categories, which is buy and make and make. When with reference to foreign, I have already told that there is offset provisions above 300 crore rupees and also the transfer of technology in buy and make. That means that if foreign companies are coming and also we are dealing with them for procurement of say even missiles, aircrafts and so on, they have to make a certain aspect of those procurement in India itself. Also, the DSC will be also looking at the field trial evaluations. For example, say there have been a recent development of missile system in India. Now, from the testing, development and every aspects, finally it has to go for field trials, right? It has to go for field trials. And after the field trials, the effectiveness of the missiles will be evaluated. And the evaluation will be done by the DSA, which is a very, very important task to do. So, the green signals given by the DSA will be determining if a missile will be approved for mass production in India or not. Now, we need to look at the recent deals which have been signed off right now and also the significance of it. We know that India is faced by many threats. For example, the Chinese aggression that is going on, and also on the growing race for nuclear weapons, on becoming a global superpower in the next 20 to 50 years, the military power aspect is also very, very important. So that is why India is right now trying to boost its own domestic capabilities when it comes to defense expenditures. And here, there have been 4 significant deals which have been signed as of now. The 4 deals can be seen here. First is the signing of this Prachand helicopter. Then we signed around 97 Tejas to be manufactured in India locally, and this is the latest generation of Tejas aircraft which is equipped with the modern state-of-art sensors and also safety features that is better than the Russian MiGs. Then we will be also signing off an anti-tank munition, namely the area denial munition which can be seen here. This is what is known as area denial munition, which are anti-tank munitions. That means if you have seen the tanks in the defense, say documentaries or films, you have seen the tanks which are very, very heavily armored. So these are those anti-tank, munitions that can totally attack one tank. Then we also signed for towed gun system. Towed gun systems are mobile gun systems, and these are not usually guns that you can carry around. These are these amount of guns which have huge amount of firepower, and they are easily mobile. They can be transported along the borders of India and everywhere that is prone to deployment of the armed forces. So the significance here we have to understand, when India is trying to invest and also procure domestically manufactured defense procurement, this is promoting indigenous manufacturing. Because right now we have to understand that most of the defense capabilities in India are, say, procured from the Russia, the France, or say the United States. Now India is trying to domestically manufacture those defense equipments, and right now this recent deal is worth 2.23 trillion Indian rupees. That is also amounting to around $26 billion. So can you imagine the fact that if India is giving these contracts to local manufacturers worth of $26 million, it will be creating what? It will be creating this defense output. No word is regarding that. But it will be also creating employment opportunities. Right? It will be also encouraging the recent startups that are coming in the defense sector. Generally, the startups in defense sector, they are concerned regarding the manufacture of munitions, manufacture of drones for defense. So they can also set up higher targets of, say, manufacturing spacecrafts, which is the scene in most of the developed nations such as the US. Their startups are also developing the aircrafts. So let Indian startups also be encouraged by this creation of a new big economy. Then it is also aligned with the India's goals of Atmanirbharta, that is self-reliance in defense. Because we need to be reliant on our own systems when it comes to defense of our own territory. So let India manufacture more and more aircrafts. That is also a sign of self-reliance. And finally, of late, India have been exporting to countries, for example, Indonesia, various BrahMos missiles, and also in some cases of domestic missiles too. So if we have to understand that not only this is very significant in a domestic region, but also we can increase our exports of defense in the surrounding regions too. Now, as I have already told, India stands third, that is after US and China. India stands third in the world's overall allocation to defense expenditure. Then also when it comes to the sheer manpower, India is number 2 after China. That means the amount of armed personnel that is available all over the world, India is currently ranked 2. That is why we have to understand that these are coming at the heels of these kind of data. Right now the world is also seeing evolving threats. For example, the crises that are going on in Russia, Ukraine and Israel. So these are the threats which can even spill over to India in case anything spirals out of geopolitical order. Then India faces a constant neighborhood threat from Pakistan and China. Then there are these non-conventional threats on the cyber front too. So India have to be very, very pertinent with when it comes to the traditional threats, and that is why it has to invest in these particular deals. It is a no-brainer. Then we have to understand, after signing these deals, right now Indian government authorities and defense authorities must be ensuring that the delivery, production and everything of the, say, aircrafts, helicopters, munitions, they must be on time, they must be meeting deadlines, because we have seen many delays in these defense procurements, and that is delaying the overall strategic ambition of India. So we need accelerated production and delivery of the equipments. Then we also need continuous technological upgradation. Typically this can be with the foreign partners, because remember that in buy and make we have that transfer of technology. So we need more technology to actually learn from them and integrate in our own systems, in our own aircrafts and, say, submarines. And finally, we have to also collaborate with the domestic defense companies and academia to boost research and development in the defense arena. So these are the things that are the way forward in this particular issue. Now, in the next one, we are talking about an interview which has been published in the Hindu, and it is very, very important. It is talking about the emerging global order in the international arena, because the world is right now witnessing several disruptions in recent years. This is important for GS2, where we will be trying to understand the various policies that have effect indirectly and direct on the Indian interests. Now, we have to understand first, what do you mean by global order? See, global order is the arrangement of power and authority in the overall international arena that provides the framework for the conduct of diplomacy and world politics on a global scale. Because on a global scale, there are various countries of both, say, different military might, different economical might, and also cultural and various other aspects. So there has to be a proper order that must be there in the global world that can prevent some countries being aggressive on other countries, that can help the economical exchange between different countries. So this is the particular significance of a global order. Then there are various key elements of global order. For example, the sovereignty of a country. The country or a state that must have a proper defined boundary of its own. It must have the acknowledgement of the citizens of that particular country. Then that particular country must attain statehood. It means that it must be accorded international recognition by various countries, by various organizations. Otherwise, we cannot have a proper global order. If a country does not have their own sovereignty and statehood, then there cannot be any particular global order in the global arena. Then we have to consider the case of diplomacy. If I define diplomacy, diplomacy is the process of negotiation and communication. Negotiation and communication are the very traits of human beings to sustain a greater peaceful discourse. And this negotiation and collaboration and communication is between nations at the international level, because generally nations between themselves, they need to reduce conflicts, they need to promote cooperation, and also they need to advance their own interests, both economic, political interests. That is why diplomacy is also one of the constituents of a peaceful and equitable global order. Next, the international laws. They must also be creating an architecture of a global order where it has to preserving the interest of all nations while also punishing the nations which are involved in wrongdoing, such as there can be many nations which have been penalized. It can be the cases of climate change violation, it can be the case of terrorism, right? So these are the cases where international law can come to the rescue in preserving the global order. Then there are these multilateral organizations such as United Nations, such as the WTO, and so on, the World Bank, the IMF. These are helped at preserving the economic, the social sanctity of the entire world. And finally, the power and authority is also there. The power and authority can also be classified into hard power, soft power, where hard power concerns with economic sanctions and military, say, takeover of a particular nation. Then the soft power can also be related with cultural aspects of a particular nation. Power and authority. This is one of the most controversial aspects of the global order, because it has been seen that countries like the US and typically the countries that belong to the West, they have had greater power and authority when it came to their hard power, and also the influence they have, the authority they have on various aspects of diplomacy, sovereignty, international law and multilateral organizations, because we know the West have greater power and influence on all of these above. So that is why it is said that power and authority is one of the key determinants of global order. Now if we look at the origin of present global order, the roots can be traced back to the World War II. When World War II concluded the entire global arena, they understood that wars are not the equilibrium of the present world. So that is why the United Nations were set up. There were various multilateral organizations that were created, and hence the world back then, it felt that there must be international cooperation at the international level. But after that, the Cold War would ensue between the USSR and the US, where the entire world was kind of divided into two poles. The pole, the one that was supported by the US and was actually led by the US, and the other pole was actually led by the USSR or the Soviet Union. And there was also a third dimension that can be seen of non-alignment, which India was also a part of. They thought that either of the camps are not to be trusted, and they must be remaining neutral in world affairs. Then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US would emerge as the single dominant power. And that is when we come to know of the word unipolar. Unipolar aspect is related to the key elements of global order, when USA, using its dominant position, can influence a country's sovereignty, can influence diplomacy all over the world, can also influence international law, multilateral organizations. And here we have to understand these are the dangers of a unipolar world. And after that, right now, if you look at the contemporary global order, it is in a state of flux, or it can simply be called as chaotic, because right now we also have the USA, which is still a global order. Then we have emerging nations such as China and India, whose population economy is increasing day by day. And it is projected that by 2040, India will be by then the second or third largest economy, and China and India both together, they will become Asian behemoths controlling the entire world. So it is very important that we understand the dimensions of global order and also the dimensions of polarity in the near future. Next, we have to see the dimensions. According to the various authors in this interview, they have suggested that global order is nothing but a story of power. They suggested a very interesting aspect which you can include in your essay too. You can use these as some value addition in your essays in such a way that power is a story in international affairs. It starts at the time of Industrial Revolution, when the most powerful nations were the UK and the Eastern Europe, such as Germany and France, because they were heavily industrialized on the back of steam engines and naval fleets. After that, the US would also join them in the 1880s after the American Civil War. So till then, the naval fleets and the steam engines, they were determinants of a country's power. Then came the 20th century, when after the dropping of the nuclear bomb, there came the superpowers of the US and the USSR. They came to be known as the superpowers because having nuclear weapon became a big deterrent. And those who had a nuclear weapon, these countries had great powers. Next, in the 21st century, they are arguing that it is a digital age. And here, in the age of digital technologies, it is the people who are having power right now. Because right now, the narratives that is happening all over the world on democracy, on socialism, on military aspects, on peace aspects, on various other academic aspects too, these are right now decentralized on the social media platform. That is, you nowadays have information available at your fingertips. So people back then in the 20th century, they did not know, and that is why the states, the governments used to elude the people and create power asymmetry between the state and the people. Right now, due to the rise of information and digital technologies, people have the power of information. Now, people have real-time updates what is going on in the world. So, people are right now controlling the power. But again, we have to understand that people are doing this how? With the help of technologies, and with the help of, and these technologies are with the help of whom? The technological companies, right? So there is another danger in this aspect, that the technological companies can control people aspects. And here we have to understand, in present world, is it in a state of flux, or is it too much chaotic as of now? Now, we have to understand that China is in a state of rise where it is challenging the Washington based on both economic and military power. It is indulging in currency manipulation, trade wars with many nations, and also being aggressive with its neighbors including India too. Then we have to also discuss Russia. Because Russia, after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the USA announced sanctions on the Russian country. After that, Russia became increasingly close with China because it had no other option to engage economically with the rest of the world. So it found a partner in China from 2014 onwards. Now, after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, their ties, China and Russia's ties, they increased over a period of time. And that is how the world experts are viewing this particular development of the closeness between Russia and China. This can be one of the security threats for the entire world, especially for the US. And also we can understand, while Russia is becoming close to China, it is also aware of the fact that China is very aggressive in Asian continent, which Russia is also part of. So while it is also close to China, it is not alienating India on this aspect. Russia is engaging with India on, say, currency swaps, on ruble rupee experiments, and also via various defense ties, various exports, and so on. So it is also maintaining that close ties with India too. Another aspect of, say, a confusion in the global order is the recent case of Israel-Palestine issue, where the recent conflict which is going on is one of the various fault lines that we can see in the global order. Because the West have typically failed, the West that is led by the US have typically failed to control the Israel issue. And it is right now spiraling out of hand. But though, right now we are seeing a series of truce that is brokered by Qatar, and that is yet to be seen how it spans out. Then also we have seen the various rise of middle powers. Technically, we have the BRICS nations, that is the Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which are poised to be dominating the entire world in the next 40 years. So these are the middle powers in the entire world. Apart from that, we also have Africa. We also have the South American nations of, say, Argentina, Brazil and so on. They also are on the rise. Now, India's interest in this, that India's comprehensive national power, that means India's power determined on its economy, technology, societal, military aspects, will be very, very important in determining India's own global influence over the global order. Or it can create a multipolar world if India invests in it comprehensive economic power, that is spanning economy, military, technology and all those aspects. So this is a very, very important term that you can use in your IR answers. But there are some important challenges before that. First, internal challenges, such as the internal issues that India is facing with reference to their societal issues, political issues, and also the issues with respect to India's border states, and also the border nations like Myanmar, Nepal, Bhutan and so on. So India first must master these issues, solve these issues. And then it can also go on to external balancing, such as working in such a manner with the US, with China, in such a respect that India do not hurt anyone in this process. And hence, India can lead the way forward in the future world. Now, we have to understand, we have to appreciate the fact that right now we are seeing an asymmetric bipolarity. We do not have a complete bipolarity or the dominance of US in absolute manner, because the US's influence is definitely decreasing due to rise of China. But kind of we have to understand, US's influence did not decrease totally. It is still there, and that is why it is asymmetric. And it is also to be appreciated that China can never be another superpower along with the US, because China do not simply have the support or mandate of most of the nations in the global world order. So China is likely not to, say, have any supporters in their cause. This is very, very important to understand, and that is why we have to understand that when we talk about the future multipolar world, if China is to be there in the future, they have to have the support of the nations too. Next, we have to understand that cooperative multilateralism is the way forward, because the various institutions of, say, the United Nations, WTO, the WHO, these are the multilateral institutions which maintain the or preserve the world order. And that is why we have to understand all the world's countries, they have to be collaborative in this manner. Then the new technologies, say the rise of the artificial intelligence and the potential threats that they also bring in, it is also to be tackled in this manner. And finally, addressing the global challenges with reference to climate change, money laundering, terrorism, these are all have to be the issues that have to be tackled in this present global order. So these are the aspects of this article. Now in the next one, we are talking about the loss and damage fund, because on the opening day of the COP28 itself, which is being held at Dubai, a loss and damage fund that will be helping vulnerable countries to cope up with the impact of climate change, this has been officially launched. Because this is very significant, because this was in the talks for ages and ages hence, and right now the rich countries or the countries which have been responsible for the pollution and the emission historically, they've agreed to compensate the poorer nations with a loss and damage fund. This is important with GS3 because we have conservation, environmental pollution and degradation as the topics here. Now, let us discuss some of the drivers related to climate change. We have various drivers such as ocean warming and acidification, sea level rise, wind and pressure changes. If you can see, these all are having interrelated aspects and interrelated impacts, because the loss and damages out of the climate change drivers are extreme, such as ocean warming and acidification. It leads to loss of wetlands, and loss of wetlands such as ponds, nearby small wetlands which are housed to fisheries activities. This can lead to the loss of livelihood for fisher people, for example. Then rise of sea level can also lead to loss of wetlands such as the Sundarbans Delta, which is happening right now, right? Then it can also lead to enhanced flooding, extreme sea levels. It can totally submerge the small island developing nations in the Pacific Oceans. Then also the wind and pressure changes can lead to all these effects. So we have to understand that climate change and its effects are very complex and very interrelated too. So for simplification, please do use such diagrams in your mains answers to show the interlinkages. So if you want, you can pause the screen and you can take note of this particular diagram itself. Otherwise, it is also available in handout, so do not worry about that too. Now here, the loss and damage fund is to compensate those countries in which this loss and damages of, say, loss of livelihoods, damage to the built environment, damage to human beings, damage to freshwater resources, loss of dry lands. So these are the impacts that the poorer nations, particularly the global south nations, they are facing. So this will be a kind of a global financial package that can run into trillions of dollars. But the quantum of money has not been announced yet, but it is right now announced that this will be a financing package. It was initially announced in COP27 the last year, at Egypt at Sharm el Sheikh. It was there in the Sharm el Sheikh declaration as a last minute change. Here, it will be ensuring the rescue and rehabilitation of the countries who are facing the cascading impacts of the climate change as talked here. And here, the rich nations will be having the responsibility to compensate the poorer nations for the environmental aspects here. Here, the loss and damage fund can be categorized in two aspects. First, economic loss, the losses whose economic value can be found out. For example, say the cost of rebuilding infrastructure that has been damaged due to floods, the loss of revenue from agricultural crops that were damaged due to droughts or excess flooding too. So these are the things which can be measured. But there are some non-economic losses too. The non-economic losses are very difficult to measure or quantify. For example, the trauma that people experience from cyclones, loss of community due to displacement of people, or loss of biodiversity or say extinction of animals too. So can these be calculated? These are non-calculable risks. So the fund will be calculating both economic and non-economic cost as far as possible here. Now, why this fund did come at the very first place? Because we have to understand, if we look at this particular graph here, we look from 1750s to present days, and we also look at the nations like Europe, European Union, the United States. If you can see, this is the periphery of the Western nations' emissions, and this is only the periphery of the developing countries like China, India, South America, and so on. So, can we understand that around 80 to 90% of the historical emissions of carbon dioxide, they have been emitted by the West, or say the US or the global North nations. So, we can understand the US and UK and EU, they account for right now 50% of all emissions historically. Bring Russia and China, Russia, Canada, Japan and Australia, who are also developed nations, by the way, this number 50% jumps to 65%. That is 2/3 of overall carbon dioxide emissions, as also reflected from this diagram. India is only responsible for 3% of overall historical emissions that started from the industrial revolution of say 1760s, 70s and so on. So India is responsible for only 3%. China is now one of the biggest, say economy. It is also producing a substantial amount of emissions, that at the tune of 30% every year it is contributing the global CO2 emissions. So these are the data that you can quote in your mains answers too. Now, how much loss and damage is the real world really facing right now? See, according to various research, 55 vulnerable countries have suffered to the tune of around $500 billion from combined climate crisis fail in the last 20 years. So, $500 billion have been the cost for only 55 nations. Imagine the cost of the entire world. It will be running into trillions of dollars. It is estimated that this will be reaching 580 billion per year by 2030. Can you understand? It was over the last 20 years to the tune of around $525 billion. The research right now suggests that by 2030, every year, it will be at the tune of $580 billion. So the cost is huge. And here, that is why we have to understand that we need a loss and damage fund. And for you all here, I have included this very important and very interesting infographic, that is the impact of say global warming, right? Of global warming, which is say more than 0 to 0.8 degree above pre-industrial levels of carbon dioxide, the impact of say the predictions for 100 years and so on. So please do again pause the video and look at this graph very properly. This can effectively help you revise your climate change aspects. Now, how big is the fund? It is still a question because no quantum has been announced so far. The scale, the replenishment cycle, it's again unclear as of now. The World Bank right now will be overseeing in the beginning of the fund. Initially, the countries, specifically developing countries, they had objections with the World Bank because it is typically controlled by the West. Right now, they are included in the source also. That means the source of the fund, whatever the quantum of the fund will be, the rich and some of the developing countries, they will be paying for that fund, and they will be overseeing the World Bank as to how they are actually allocating the finances to. Now, according to IPCC reports, loss and damages will be increasing in the future. It is certain. And these increases will be unequally distributed among the global South nations mostly, that is the developing nations, and particularly above all they will be impacting the socially and economically weaker sections. So this is very important to understand the impacts of the climate change and invest in greener energies, as these funds of say loss and damages will be also investing in and also rehabilitating the impact of the climate change. In the next article, we will be looking at two economic indicators which has in the news recently. According to the very first one, India's GDP grew by 7.6% in the July to September quarter as per the NSO, National Statistical Office. On the other side, we also see that fiscal deficit touched 45% of the full year target from April to October so far. That means the fiscal deficit in India is kind of within control as of now. Now this is very important for prelims, for economics, and also for mains if you want to note some quarterly data, and also if you have economics optional and you want to go or also do the analysis of individual quarters in your answers. Now let us look at the GDP aspect first. India's GDP grew by 7.6%, which is a very good indicator as of now, because most of the global economy is slowing down and India is at a rate of 7.6%. According to Chief Economic Advisor of India, at the end of the year, it is expected that India will be closing at around 7% growth all the year round. Note that this is a quarterly data. This is the September 2023 data. And here this is slightly slower than the previous quarter of 7.8%, but it is higher than the RBI's projected data of 6.5%. Here we can see the measure of the growth in this particular quarter has been due to mining and manufacturing, which registered double-digit growth of 10% and 13.9%. So mining and manufacturing sector is contributing good. Then we have to also understand the construction GVA, which also jumped at the double rate. But here there are several experts who are warning us about the base effects. Now base effect generally refers to the effects of the previous years versus the recent years, as in it means that when we are comparing the growth rate, we take generally 2 years. For example, if we are computing the growth rate in 2023-24 financial year, we have to compare this against the same quarters of the previous years. Now imagine if the previous year's quarter data is low, then in the present year we will be having higher growth, right? Or say example, earlier, say in the quarter 1 of 2022, GDP was 100. Now in quarter 1 of 2023, GDP is 101 rupees. So it increased by 1%. Right? Now we have to understand that if in 2024 quarter 1 GDP is 104 rupees, then from quarter 1 it increased by around 3 rupees more, right? But if we assume, for example, that quarter 1 was 100 from 2023, then GDP in 2024, the base effect will be more. That means if we have the base, that is the previous year, on a lower number, the present year will be showing higher numbers. This is generally the base effect. And also we can find the electricity, gas, water supply and other utility services, they have also increased over a period of time. Now this is the overall data that you can observe, and these are all the constituents also that you can see here, right? Now let us look at the fiscal deficit data. Now we know that there are various components of budgets, such as we have the revenue receipt, capital receipt. Under that we have tax revenue, non-tax revenue. Under capital we have debt and non-debt. So these are all the components of the budget. From here we find the difference between total expenditure and the total receipt of the government as a fiscal deficit. And here the fiscal deficit from April to October, this is standing at around 8 lakh crore, right? So this is for the 2023-24 year. The fiscal deficit of the government is estimated to be around 17.8 or say around 5.9%. So it was estimated earlier, but right now the deficit is at only 45% or say half of that. So for the remaining of the year, it is expected the deficit will be on the lower side. Now apart from this, if you want to look at the individual data, so out of this, India has received around this much from tax revenue, non-tax revenue and non-debt capital receipts. Non-debt capital receipts are the interest receipts and also the dividends that they get from the various CPACs. The total expenditure of India is around this much. So the difference between them is actually the deficit. Now India has a fiscal consolidation target of around 44.5% of GDP by 2025 to 26, and this data, that is, it is limiting to around 45% right now, is a good sign as of now. Now in the final one, we will be looking at XPoSat, which will be launched by the ISRO via the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle from Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. Now what will we be looking at? See, XPoSat is an X-ray observatory. Now why we need X-ray observatories? Because there are some events in the universe such as supernovas, and this is one of them. We also have some events known as the black holes, such as this one, which emit a large amount of X-rays, because these are extremely hot, dense bodies which emit X-rays, and if we can study the X-rays from there, we can better have the understanding of the universe and how it works, and also we can understand various other aspects of how the Big Bang originated and how the stars formed and so on. And that's why we need X-ray observatories. But don't we have X-ray observatories on the Earth? Why do we need to send one X-ray observatory onto the, say space, or say in the Earth's orbit in the outer space? Because atmosphere acts as a barrier with reference to the X-ray waves. Because we have to understand, this is the electromagnetic spectrum, as we have also discussed in the earlier analyst too. It is very important for prelims, because time and again they have asked again the arrangement of the particular electromagnetic spectrum here and there. So we can understand X-rays belong to this particular wavelength, and the atmosphere acts as a barrier to the X-rays observatories located on the Earth, and that is why ISRO is planning to send an X-ray polarimeter observatory into the space. It is India's first and the world's second. Actually, it is the NASA who launched it for the very first time via this imaging X-ray polarimeter explorer. India is also launching the same, and it will be the second country in the entire world. It will be launching this into the lower Earth orbit, and the lifetime is expected to be around 5 years. It is having two payloads, or two heavy specialized equipments in the particular launch. First is the Pollux, which looks like this. Here it is the actual X-ray observatory that will be looking at the X-ray wavelengths and so on. It will be looking at the studies. So it is a main payload here, which is known as Pollux. The next payload is XPECT, or X-ray spectroscopy and timing. It is another specialized equipment that will be looking at spectrography details. Now why am I giving these terms? Because UPSC can ask you, Pollux and XPECT has been recently seen in news, and it relates to what? And then they will be giving you 4 options. So be very particular regarding these terms for your exams. So that was all for today. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Till the next time, all the best.